First and foremost, thank you so much for being here tonight. You're really in for a very special treat. My name is Lisa Bachman, and I am the Executive Director at the Alabama Holocaust Education Center. Our mission is to educate about the history and lessons of the Holocaust to build a much more just and compassionate society that recognizes the humanity of every individual. We're gathered here this evening to commemorate International Holocaust Remembrance Day. This day is observed globally on January 27th, marking the anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau, a concentration camp. This day was established by the United Nations to honor the 6 million Jewish lives that were lost in the Holocaust and the millions of others who were targeted, persecuted, and killed by the Nazi regime and its collaborators. Tonight, we have 2 Holocaust survivors with us. I would like to please acknowledge Jack Schnipper. And of course, our incredible speaker, Maud Dahme, who you'll hear in a second. We're very, very, very fortunate to have Holocaust survivors with us. In fact, this week, today, as a matter of fact, was the funeral of the passing of Isaiah Schachter, who we loved very deeply, and we will miss him greatly. That's why evenings like this are even more important than ever before. Whenever I have the honor of speaking at commemorations and events like this, I turn to the lessons that I've learned personally from Holocaust survivors. One survivor once said to me, "The Holocaust did not start with the gas chambers." And they were right. It didn't. The Holocaust did not start with killing. It started with words, with misinformation, and with propaganda. A year ago, we lost Holocaust survivor Dr. Robert May, and his words about the slow, steady normalization have always stuck with me. He always said that it began with neighbors choosing not to question things that they were hearing, with institutions making choices for convenience over courage. And this brings me to something that's very, very important for us to remember. Hitler did not commit the Holocaust alone. It took many, many thousands of people to carry it out. We call them collaborators. They followed orders. They looked away, even when they knew something wasn't right. They stayed silent. This is why nights like tonight are one of the most powerful actions that any of us can take. It's to hear the story of a Holocaust survivor. Today, we have to do something very simple and very brave. We must get curious and ask questions. We must remember that we always have a choice. And we have to remember that the choices that we take matter. They matter deeply. We have to choose to ask questions. Is this true? Who benefits from this story? Who's being blamed? Who's being left out? Who is being dehumanized? International Holocaust Remembrance Day reminds us that what happened once can happen again. And unless we actively choose to make some choices for the better and in favor of humanity, we won't go down a different path. We have to know what the warning signs are, and we have to recognize that they are with us today. We're living in a time when anti-Semitism and many forms of hatred and bigotry are rising all around the world. Misinformation is spreading so much faster than the truth. Entire groups of people are being blamed for the action of a few. People are being stereotyped and treated less than human. This is why the lessons of the Holocaust are so important, and why it makes my heart happy to see every one of you here tonight. This is one of the most powerful ways that we can protect the lessons that we can learn from the Holocaust, by listening to people who lived them. This is why tonight is such a privilege. It's a privilege to be together to hear from Holocaust survivor Maud Dahme. You're going to hear about people in her story who made some really hard choices, and they made an incredible difference. As you listen tonight, I would like to invite you to do something very simple and deeply meaningful. I would like you to listen not only with your ears, but with your heart. Listen for something that surprises you. Most importantly, listen for something that unsettles you. Because when we feel that feeling of being unsettled, that's usually when we start to take action. Listen for something that's going to stay with you. And then, most importantly, please tell somebody about it. Tell a friend, a child, a grandchild, tell a coworker. Share one thing that you've heard here tonight. Because when we share these stories, we keep their memory alive. And that's how we can have influence. And that's how we can make things better. Tonight, you're going to hear a Holocaust survivor share her story. This is more than history. This is a gift. We're all receiving an incredible gift tonight. And it's a gift that we can pay forward with these very simple calls to action. So before we begin, I would like to introduce someone whose passion really made tonight possible. Shortly after I moved here, I had the opportunity to meet Cornelia LaRussa, and she immediately told me about this dynamo of a woman that we just had to bring in. So we did, and here we are. So please join me in welcoming Cornelia LaRussa, who is deeply committed to our mission and who is going to introduce our guest speaker, Maud Dahme.
Again, thank each of you for being here. We really, really appreciate your time and attention to this important topic. Maud Dahme was born in Amersfoort in the Netherlands.
We can't hear you.
Born in Amersfoort, the Netherlands. How's that? Is that better?
That's right.
Thanks. Maud Dahme and her sister spent the entire German occupation of her native country in hiding. Together with her parents and sister, she emigrated to the United States in 1950, at first settling in New York City. A passionate advocate of Holocaust education, she has been a member of the New Jersey State Commission on Holocaust Education since 1982. As with most child survivors of the Holocaust until recently, she found it difficult to speak about her years as a hidden child. However, since the mid-1980s, she has overcome her inhibitions and has been a frequent speaker to students about her experience. Her book, Chocolate, The Taste of Freedom, the Holocaust memoir of a hidden Dutch child, chronicles Dahme's wartime experiences as well as post-war events in her life. Miss Dahme was inducted as an unsung hero into the New Jersey Hall of Fame in 2014. She's a nationally respected leader in the field of education. In addition to having been a longtime member of the New Jersey Commission on Holocaust Education, she was a past president of the New Jersey State Board of Education, where she served from 1983 to 2007. She was also a member and the chair in 1998 of the Interstate Migrant Education Council until 2007. In 1995, she served as president of the National Association of State Boards of Education. In addition to holding a number of other local and state posts, she was a member of the North Hunterdon Board of Education from 1976 to 1983. She's a resident of Flemington in Hunterdon County, New Jersey. She has 4 children, 9 grandchildren, and 2 great-grandchildren. I met Maud in the summer of 24. I was on a trip to commemorate the 80th anniversary of D-Day, and she was one of the guests on the trip, and I'm so grateful that we met, and to you for coming. Maud Dahme was born into a Jewish family in Amersfoort, Netherlands in 1936. When Germany ordered all Jews to vacate their homes and get to the train stations, Dahme and her sister Rita were told they were going on vacation. The girls were woken up at 3 a.m., told to not wear their stars on their coats, and walked with their parents to the next town. And we'll let Maud tell you all about her experiences after that. Thank you so much.
Okay, good evening. It's a pleasure for me to be in Birmingham, my first visit, and I'm so impressed with your beautiful city. And it's a pleasure to be here this evening to share with you my story as a hidden child during the Second World War. But before I start, I'm just going to read something. And it's called Facing Memories, Silent No More. Years of life beyond almost certain death. Who would have thought that we would live to see this day, given such overwhelming odds? For most of those years, child survivors have lived in silence. Silence served us well while hiding. Survival so often dependent on not being noticed, being inconspicuous, or the ability to suppress tears and ignore pain. Grief was born in silence, so was rage. Silence is the language of the child survivor. We might have talked after the war, but adults persuaded us, get on with life, forget the past. Adults who themselves had survived and suffered so much, inadvertently diminished the experiences of the children. In the aftermath of that silence, which involved our existence, what needed saying was not said. And I read this because I never talked about it. We came to the United States in 1950, and I never spoke. I learned to speak English pretty well without much of an accent. Nobody asked me, where are you from? And I never talked about it. Sure, some of my friends knew, my family knew. And even my parents never talked to us about it. And then one day I saw there was going to be a program on 60 Minutes. And it was a story about Raoul Wallenberg. He saved many Hungarian Jews. I thought, oh, I want to watch that program. So I watched it, and it was beautifully done. And then I couldn't wait till the following week, because 60 Minutes, when they do a program, it isn't until at the end of the following week's program when they show you of what comments had made on the previous week's program. And I waited and waited to see the comments, and this is what appeared. And this was on CBS 60 Minutes on March 29, 1981. And I'll quote, "The Jews of Europe were not exterminated in gas chambers. The gas chambers were wartime propaganda fantasies." I went, what? How can somebody say this? And it was signed by someone I know. I was just so shocked by this and decided then and there that I would start to speak of the experiences that my sister and I had during the Second World War. Now, I was born, as was said previously, in a town called Amersfoort in the Netherlands, and I lived there with my mother and my father and our sister Rita, 2 years younger than I. My mother had originally come from Germany. She had come to the Netherlands for a party and met this nice young man, and a romance started. And she came to live, married my father, and came to live and became a Dutch citizen. while her parents were still living in Frankfurt am Main, where my German grandfather was the cantor at the synagogue there. My father worked for his father. My grandfather had a restaurant at the train station in our hometown. My dad learned to be a chef and worked and ran the restaurant. And my grandfather also had kiosks at the various train stations, but a kiosk in the Netherlands is not like a kiosk as you know it here. It was more like a newspaper stand. Newspapers, cigars, cigarettes, candy, that kind of stuff. And he had many of them, I found out many years later, all through the Netherlands at various train stations. And we lived a very idyllic life. But as you know, someone by the name of Adolf Hitler rose to power in Germany. And things started to happen in Germany, again, mostly against the Jewish population. And many, many German Jews left the country because nobody knew what was going to happen. And many came to the Netherlands. Oh, they had friends and relatives, but many arrived in the Netherlands and they didn't know anybody. So the Dutch government took some land, built housing, so that they all had a roof over their heads. And it was rather large, the number of people that were there, but there were teachers there. There were children there. So the teachers set up a little school so the kids could continue their education. Then there were also physicians, and they made a little hospital. And the place was called Westerbork in the Netherlands. And the Netherlands had been neutral in the First World War and wanted to remain neutral in the Second World War. So nothing much was being done in the Netherlands other than really taking care of all these poor people who arrived in the Netherlands. And more things started to happen in Germany. And in 1940, in the middle of the night, we heard airplanes overhead, low, flying low. What is happening? Hitler invaded the Netherlands. In the middle of the night, soldiers were parachuting down. Everyone was, what is happening? And then the next day, tanks and soldiers and trucks started marching in. And for 5 days, the Dutch armed forces tried to fight this mighty German army. Hitler didn't expect that. He expected there was going to be no resistance. So on the 5th day, he came in and bombed our biggest port city of Rotterdam. Many, many people were killed. Many, many people were left homeless. And he said to the Dutch, if you do not surrender now, I'm going to bomb every city in the Netherlands. And he had a list of all the cities that he was going to bomb. So the Dutch surrendered. And that's when it started for us, the Jews of the Netherlands. The Netherlands is a monarchy, and at that time it was Queen Wilhelmina. And she left the country and set up, with her cabinet, and set up a government in exile in England. And now Hitler appointed someone by the name of Dr. Arthur Seyss-Inquart to be the commandant of the Netherlands. At first, it was quiet. And then the very first thing that came out, it said, if you were Jewish, you had to register. So my parents and everyone else registered. Who would have thought what this was going to lead up to? Of where you lived, who lived with you, where you worked, as much information as possible. Do you own your house? Do you rent a house? And the first thing that happened when all these were received, he fired everyone who was Jewish, who worked in the federal government, the town government, fired. Now, at that time, I started in the summer of 1941, I started kindergarten. Oh, I was so happy going to school. And I remember my teacher was Mrs. Eva Schnell. She and her husband were Jewish and also had escaped Germany. She was now my kindergarten teacher. And I loved going to school. And then another regulation came out. Said if you were Jewish, you cannot attend public school. All Jewish children have to attend school for just Jewish children. Because I was only 5 years old, 5.5 years old. I didn't understand. And it was very, very hard. But more and more things started to happen as far as restrictions. All of a sudden, signs appeared in parks. And I remember because my Dutch grandmother was in the hospital, and they had taken away our cars. Jews can't have cars or bicycles. Everyone in the Netherlands had to turn in their radio. And I remember my grandmother in the hospital, and I remember going with my mother to the hospital. It was on the other end of town to see my grandmother. We were not allowed as Jews to take public transportation, no bus or trains for us. So life became very, very difficult. And then so many things, and I didn't really understand. And then in the winter of 1942, and in the spring of the winter, another regulation came out, and it said anyone Jewish, 6 years old and older, has to wear the yellow star. You've all seen the star, and the Dutch star said J-O-O-D, Jood, meaning the Dutch for Jew. Well, I was so excited. I had just turned 6. I could wear a star just like the big people. I didn't understand. And I felt like a big deal because my sister was only 4, and hey, I'm bigger than her. I can wear a star. Of course, I didn't realize what it meant. But so many more restrictions started coming out. My Jewish housewives, these are the days you can go shopping. These are the hours. More and more restrictions as much as possible. And the businesses, my grandfather and my father had to take in a Nazi so it could be watched. And more things started to happen against the Jewish population. And we were Dutch citizens, just like everybody else. And then we had one synagogue in our town, and the rabbi called the whole congregation together on a Sunday afternoon, and he read a letter. And the letter was from the German command, and it was addressed to the Jews of Amersfoort. We have wonderful news for you. And this was from the Nazi occupation. We have wonderful news for you. We're going to have trains at the train station to take you away from the war scene, because war had started. There were bombings, and also we're going to take you away from this war scene. We're going to have trains at the train station. We'll let you know when we want you to appear. Here's a list of things you should bring with you. A blanket, a pillow, a plate, a cup, some utensils, some clothing, things that you might need on this train ride. And it said, the trains will be going east, period. No country, no city, nothing. And everybody's sitting there saying, well, where are these trains going? So when my parents left the synagogue, a friend of theirs was I think he was like the deputy mayor of the town. And they thought, maybe he knows. Where are these trains going? What is going on? So they had to sneak in his house, because we were not allowed to visit our Christian friends, nor were they allowed to visit us. So they snuck in his house to ask him what was going on. And my mother happened to look on his desk, and she saw that same letter that had just been read in the synagogue. She thought, how come he has this letter? And then she told me, I could think of only one thing he could be out of two. He's either collaborating with the Nazis, and there were many Dutch who did, or he's working for the resistance, and many worked for the resistance. So she got up enough nerve, and his name was Kees, and she said, Kees, how come you have this letter? And he said, well, I'll tell you, I'm working with the resistance. And we have been going all over the Netherlands, asking Christian families, if the need should arise, would you be willing to take and hide Jewish children? The children are our first priority. And he said, I have an address for your children. Think about it, I cannot tell you who they are. I cannot tell you where they live. I think the only thing he said, they lived on a farm. And he said, I'd like to know by tomorrow morning. So I'm sure there are many parents here this evening. What a difficult decision to make as a parent. To send your children to total strangers, you don't know where, you don't know if you'll ever see them again. My parents evidently talked about it and decided they would do this to save us if they could. And I remember later on, they told him yes, they would do this, and it was later on in the day, my mother sat me down and she said, I got such good news for you. You know what? You and your sister Rita are going to a farm for a couple of weeks on a vacation. And while you're on the farm, Dad and I are going on our vacation, and then we'll swing by and pick you up again after 2 weeks. I was so excited to go to a farm living in the city. So my sister, she's only 4. My mother really didn't share too much with her. And then my mother said, I'm going to pack. She packed a little bag for each of us with clothes and things for the next 2 weeks. And then I remember my father took us later that afternoon, and my sister was on her tricycle, I was on my bicycle. He had the 2 little suitcases, and we walked a couple of blocks to another house in the neighborhood. But it's so sad because there's no one. What did my father tell us where we were going? Why we were not taking, of course we couldn't take a train or anything, but why were we going to a house in the neighborhood? But I never thought to ask. And of course now there's no one to even ask and why. But I remember we got to the garden gate of this house, and my father gave me the suitcases, and he took the bicycles, and he said, go ahead in. I remember that. And he said to me, take very good care of your little sister, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks. And he turned around and left with the bicycles, and I took my sister, we went into the house, and it was a really nice family. Their name, the gentleman's name was Jan Canis, and they also had children. We went in the house, and we had dinner with them. They put us to bed there. And it must have been like 2 o'clock in the morning. They came into the bedroom and they said, hurry up girls, get dressed, we're leaving. So I guess we just did as we were told. And this is what had to happen. Mr. Canis was going to bring us to this farm, this family who were willing to hide us. But we couldn't, first of all, we couldn't take a train. And second of all, if we took a train from our train station, that's where their businesses were, everybody knew my sister and I. We were little girls, we're always there with our parents, and they didn't want us to be seen there. And I remember walking through the woods in the middle of the night in the pitch dark we ended up in the next town. I remember walking through the woods because he had a flashlight. I'm a big girl now, I have my own flashlight. So I'm going like this, and I saw these blueberries. I'm picking blueberries, eating blueberries. He's getting a little upset with me because I guess we were in a hurry. And it's so interesting, just as a footnote, I met some of his daughters a number of years ago, and they said, yes, our father kept talking about you and your blueberries. So by daylight, we were in the next town and took a train. And I don't know how, and the town that we were going to was Oldebrook, a farming community, which was located all along a major highway with one lane this way, one lane that way. This is the 1940s. The farmhouses, and in back of the farmhouses were all the fields. And I don't remember how we got from the train station to the farmhouse, but I remember being at the farmhouse, and there were German soldiers walking all over, and they had these huge guns set up because they were shooting at the Allied planes that were coming over on their bombing runs. Soldiers were walking everywhere on the highway, nothing but military trucks. All I remember is they took us, not in the house, they walked us to the back of the house, to the wheat field. This was July, August, the wheat had not been cut. And I think they probably told us we were going to play hide and go seek or something that we had, all I remember was that we were told to hide in this wheat field. Because the wheat had not been cut, I was little, it was over my head. And I remember they said, take your sister by the hand and just don't walk in like this, because you leave a trail, and very obvious, somebody sees somebody went in, that we had to kind of zigzag in. And they said, oh, you know, and it looks like it's going to rain. It rains a lot in the Netherlands. And they handed me an umbrella. So I took my sister and the umbrella, and we walked into the field. I don't know how long we were there, but my sister started crying. She wanted her mommy. And then it started to rain. I'm such a bright child. I opened the umbrella, but it had to be over the wheat. So now you could see an umbrella for about 20 miles and a child crying in a wheat field. So I guess they decided this was not a good idea. And I remember they took us in the house, and that evening, and also these people there wore the traditional Dutch costumes, the wooden shoes and the whole thing, and they also spoke a dialect which was not too easy to understand. But that evening there were a couple of relatives, I guess, came over, I remember, and I thought, oh, I'm such a big girl. I said, you know, I'm a big girl now because I wear a star. I'm not wearing my star. Oh. And I must have said something else, and then the relatives left. And then they sat me down, and this couple who were willing to hide us were in their 60s, had never had children, but this whole area was deeply, deeply evangelist, very religious, and very caring. And that evening, they sat me down, 6.5 years old. And they said, we're going to tell you something that you must remember. No matter who asks you, who are you? You're supposed to be our nieces who had been bombed out of the city. There was so much bombing, and so many people were homeless, and people were taken in, strangers. So you were our nieces, and you were bombed out of the city and now living with us. And since you are our nieces, you had to have our last name. My name in Dutch was Paper, but now my name was going to be Sprong. And your first name, because my first name is Maud, and in Dutch it's Maud, and it was very unusual. And your first name is going to be Margie or Margie. So you're Margie Sprong, and your sister Rita will be Rika Sprong. And since you are our nieces, you have to call us aunt and uncle. Now, we didn't know these people at all. But, so you're going to, uncle was oom and aunt was tante, but my sister couldn't say tante and always, all our lives, called her Tunny. You can't go to school here, because we're afraid that if you talk to a classmate and say something like maybe where I'm from or something, and that student may go home and tell their parents, oh, there's a new girl in my class, and she said, and these people, her family may be collaborating with the Nazis. So you can't go to school. The only thing we were allowed to do was go to church with them on Sundays. And it was, you know, trying to think back, I didn't understand. But they said if I do not remember, and we had to stay in the house, and they were so poor, they both had to work the farm all day. So they were out all day, and we had to stay in the house, and they said, don't go near the windows, don't answer and knock on the door, because there were German soldiers walking all over. Until you have to stay until you remember your new name. And I guess eventually I did, and then we were allowed to go with him, and we were passed off as their nieces to everyone else. So it was not fully understanding, but the fear, I think, that I had. If I messed up, soldiers were going to take us away. And I remember one Sunday after church, we went to visit Aunt's or Tunny's widowed sister on another farm. And went over there, and we were so surprised, because who was hiding there but Mrs. Eva Schnell, my kindergarten teacher from my hometown. So we were so excited. to see her. So every Sunday after church, we would go there, and she was beginning to teach us how to read and write. And we were so excited, and then one day we didn't go anymore. Never ever saw them again. And it wasn't until many years after the war I found out what happened. Someone revealed who they were and where they were hiding. And people were collaborating, and for food or for whatever benefit personally they could get if they knew something like that. And German soldiers came on Ancestors Farm, searched the house, didn't find anyone. Then they went outside and went exactly to that haystack where they were hiding underneath. So they knew even all along exactly where they were hiding and took them. And then anyone who was hiding Jews also would be taken. So they said to Anne's sister, "We're taking your son." I think he was about 18 or 19 at the time. And she said, "No, this is my farm, you have to take me." Took her son. And they took them to a place, because the Nazis kept very good records of everyone they arrested or whatever, and they were taking them to a facility not too far away where they had all this others also that had been found to process them. Somehow the young man had some connections, and he was able to get home. But my teacher and her husband were there for a couple of days, and one night some Dutch Nazis came into this facility, took out my teacher, her husband, and 4 other men, and secretly marched them to a park nearby, gave them shovels, had them dig their own graves, and shot them dead. Covered it up. The next day, they're looking for what happened? We're missing 6 people. And then it got a little complicated as to what happened. I now know what happened with them. Some people had said they had put them on the train, but that didn't happen. They were shot dead there. That was covered up. And after the war, they were reburied in a local cemetery. But these were the kind of things that were happening. And then another time, I remember in the afternoon, we went to visit some relatives and came back, and then around dusk, Uncle said to me, "I want to take you outside and show you something." So he took me outside, and we went into one of the barns on this farm. And that barn had all our wood, because it was very, there was a water pump, it was very primitive, there was no gas or electric, so we had a lot of wood. And also living with us was Aunt's brother, who was a wooden shoemaker, so he had a lot of wood, wasted wood too. So, we walked into this barn, and that barn was completely open on one end. It was more like a roof over the barn, where all this wood was. And you could look, right there was the next farm. And Uncle looked around. There were no German soldiers around at all. So we went into the barn, and then I remember he bent down and he cleaned the wood. And there was like a trap door. And he opened it up, and I looked inside. It was like a hole they had dug in the ground. And there was a young Jewish boy hiding there. He was about 17. He had like some straw mattresses and some candles. I had not seen him. Evidently he had been on the farm, but I had never seen him, and had been sleeping at night in meadows and people's haystacks. Who was he? He lived in Amsterdam and lived there with his family, and his father and his 2 older brothers were already taken away. And he was living in the apartment with his mother, like on the 3rd floor of an apartment, the top floor. And it was like in the middle of the night, they heard a truck or something outside. They looked out the window of the apartment and saw it was a truck with German soldiers jumping out, entering the apartment building. And his mother said, "They're coming to get us." So he said to his mother, and I think it's also in the United States, sometimes apartment buildings and the houses on the top floor have access to the attic. He said, the apartment next door is empty. why don't we get up there, over, and into that apartment and hide there until the morning and then figure out what we're going to do? So she says, no, I don't want to do that. You want to do that? You go ahead. So he did. They came into the building and took his mother and his little brothers. The next morning, he came back down into his own apartment, and he knew where he wanted to go. Because as a youngster, a number of years before, he had had the opportunity as a city boy to go to a farm for a couple of weeks in the summer. And he had been at the farm where we were now hiding. And he knew if he could get there, they would hide him. And on his way out of Amsterdam, he stopped by, there was a Jewish theater, a big Jewish theater in Amsterdam, still there. But it was being used as like a holding place. As they were finding people, they were all dumped into this, families, kids, adults. And he knew that, so he thought maybe he would just go over there and see if he could see his little brothers. And he saw his little brothers. And he said, psst, psst, come with me. And they said, no, we want to stay with Mommy. So he left. How he got to the farm, I have no idea, but he got to the farm. And he was hiding in haystacks, in meadows. I never saw him. And then one day somebody told him one of his friends from Amsterdam was being hidden on a neighboring farm. And he got so excited to see his friend. So he took a bicycle from the farm, and the bicycle belonged to Aunt's brother, who was the wooden shoemaker, but he couldn't hear and speak very well. And he had like a little sign on the back of his bike indicating that, like you all do here when you're disabled, you hang it from your rear view mirror. That was on the back of the bicycle. So he took that bicycle and he's riding down the highway and he got stopped. He had no ID. So he pretended that he couldn't speak and he couldn't hear and kept pointing to the little sign. And finally, after about 10 minutes, they had enough of him and they let him go. And that's when they decided they really had to hide him underground. So now he was in this hole in the ground. And then I was introduced to him, and then Uncle put the cover back up, the door, trap door, and we covered it with the wood and went in the house. And Uncle said, no, I want you, me, to bring him something to eat once a day. But make sure that nobody sees you. So every day I brought him something to eat, and I had to look around that there were no German soldiers or anything around. Everything was fine. So one day I brought him something to eat, and then made a few steps. I was coming up the few steps, and there were half a dozen German soldiers just standing there looking at me. And I knew I was going to be killed right then and there. I didn't know what to do. So then I decided to pretend they weren't there. And I put the trap door down, busied myself covering the wood, and they just stood there and looked at me. And I picked up the pot, and I had to turn my back to walk out. And I prayed, because I was sure they would shoot me. But nothing happened. They turned around and walked away. Of course, I got in the house, I was hysterical, and I remember every night I prayed, because they said to me, look, these soldiers didn't do anything, but they're going to tell the superior officer they're going to come back and get all of us. And every night I prayed, because I knew if they came back, it was my fault. I was maybe 7.5 at that time, but no one ever came back. And then I realized as I became an adult, what happened there? These were German soldiers who were drafted into the army. They had families of their own. They were not Nazis as such, and never told anyone what they had seen. So even all among this madness, what was going on, there was also some kindness. Because if they had come back, they would have taken all of us. So it was, for a child to live through that was very hard. And missing your parents. No parents, living with strangers. And I remember one day, Uncle, we had visited a relative or something. We came back and he was taking off his jacket. And he went like this and he fell down like right in front of me. He had a heart attack and died. And the resistance came and said to Aunt, you can't run the farm now, so we'll have to find another address for the children. I must say the resistance was always watching over us all that time. And she said, no, I'm keeping them. And if their parents return, I'll return them to their parents. If their parents do not return, I'm going to raise them as my own. So we stayed. But it was hard. And I remember there was, food. The German soldiers used to come on the farm and saw a pig and go, that one could be slaughtered, we'll take it. We'd milk the cows and put the milk in containers at the street to be pasteurized, getting back empty containers. But, we were able to hide some food. And I remember one day, the whole village got together to slaughter a pig. And it was quiet, secretly done. And I remember my sister and I were so excited because there was one part of that pig we wanted. It was a toy. There was no toys, no birthdays, nothing. And usually when I talk to students, I'll interact and say, what do you think that part was? They come up with every possible part of a pig. One day, a little girl said, I know. I said, what is it? She said, the bladder. I said, how do you know that? She said, it's in Little House on the Prairie, the book. And I was shocked. And yes, it was the bladder. Because we dried it out, and then we could blow it up and had a ball to play with. So, and it was just so many of these things. So now Uncle died, and I remember when he died on January 20th, 1944. He was buried January 24th, 1944, on my birthday. So we stayed with Aunt, and a nephew came and ran the farm. We were allowed to, it was so primitive at that time. 2 rooms in the front, a kitchen, a small basement. And in the Netherlands, in those farmhouses, the barn, the animals were in the winter, was part of the house, the back of the house. Outhouse, every Saturday night, a wooden tub was put out there and they heated water on the stove and everybody took a bath, same water, one after the other. But, we went to church on Sunday and we had to be clean. And so, I remember it's now right after Christmas in 1944, and I remember being in the room and 2 strangers came in. And they said, you have to leave right now. Evidently, they were coming. Someone had revealed who we were and where we were. And someone had overheard this, that they were going to come and get my sister and I. So I remember that these people, I don't know who they were, they put us on the back of their bicycles and we went to another farmhouse for the night. And I'm still looking for that farmhouse because all I remember it had rhododendrons in front, but I don't know what I expect to find 80 some years later, and we spent the night there, and then the next day some other people took us to another family. And this family lived not too far away is a village called Elburg, which was a fishing village. Because the Netherlands had a huge inlet from the North Sea, and the Dutch liked to reclaim land, and they had built, long before the war, a dike across from one province to the other, closed it off, it became a big lake. And many of the fish died because that was salt water, the rivers were all emptying into that too with fresh water. But there was one fish that continued to multiply in this lake. And the same thing, I'll ask kids, what fish do you think this was? And they came up with everything that couldn't possibly survive there. But again, some little boy said, I know. I said, what fish was it? He said, eel. I said, you're right. How did you know that? He says, I heard you speak before. But, so that and the family we now stayed with had a daughter. She was about 19 at the time. Johanna was her name. We called her Yo. But by the time, so we were there, and that was in the winter of December of 1944. We were allowed to go outside with other kids because we were dressed like everybody else, wooden shoes and the clothing from there. and we spoke the dialect. And so they felt it was safe because nobody was going to school. There were no teachers, there was no wood to heat the classrooms. So we were allowed to be outside with some of the children. And then I had heard people late at night, they were up in the attic, men, listening to a radio. Because nobody had radios, but there's ways of making a radio. I don't know how, but they did. And they would listen to Radio Orange coming out of England for the latest developments, because all we would hear was propaganda from the Nazis. So they would be up late at night, and I remember somebody saying there was something happened in France, because I hadn't been to school. I'm now 9 years old, no idea where France was. But of course that was the landing in Normandy. And then they explained to me that soldiers were going to come. And as you know, soldiers, when they landed, they moved up and also into Germany, but also freed Belgium, Luxembourg, came into the Netherlands, and freed the southern part of the Netherlands, where all the rivers run across into the North Sea. That's where the Nazis put up a great big defense. We were north. And it was very hard because there was also the hunger winter. There was nothing to eat. People started eating tulip bulbs. And they said, no, don't eat them, they're toxic, you're going to die. Well, nobody died. So they had all sorts of recipes with, every kind of Dutch bulb. And of course, in the fishing village, we had eel for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. There was nothing else to eat. And I remember we would be outside with the kids, and I remember trying to find big bugs. Pull their legs off, put a little stick through the body, make a little fire and roast them and eat them. Because we were so hungry. And then one day they said, yes, they're coming, they've broken through, and they're coming closer and closer. And I remember that day. It was the early morning of April the 19th, 1945. And they said, yes, they've just freed the village before us. The German soldiers had left the village. And everybody's outside already, putting out the flags, and we're going to be free, we're going to be free. And I remember everybody was so excited. German soldiers came back. And they were so angry that we were already celebrating. There was a lot of shooting at everything. And then they left again, so people went out and retrieved their dead and wounded. And everybody stayed in the house. Because they said, they're coming. And I remember, because we were in the building where we were hiding with that family, was on the second floor. And they told me where the tanks were going to come in, not on the highway. On that lake they had created was a big dike around, and they were coming from the villages on that. And I watched and watched, and all of a sudden, because now there's nobody on the street, all of a sudden there was a truck came in with men in blue coveralls. An open truck, just standing on it, and they pulled across. There was a house, there was the road, the cobblestone little road, a little brook, and another apartment house, and they pulled over there, and right behind them came the trucks with Canadian soldiers. And it was something that I will always, always remember. We were free. There was no fighting in the village. And they were just, everybody went crazy. Everybody's coming outside, running around. And the soldiers, they knew we were starving, they were throwing out their rations. They were throwing out everything, any food. And people were trying to catch it and climbing all over. I mean, people went crazy. And I remember there's a little boy running around. He says, I'm a Jew, I'm a Jew, I'm a Jew. Because he suddenly realized he could say this now. Nothing was going to happen. And I remember standing there with Yo, the daughter, and she caught something. And she wanted to give it. She gave it to me. Oh, no, I don't want it. So she unwrapped it. And she had it. Put it on my hand. It was this long brown thing. I don't know what it was. I still didn't want it. So she took it and broke off a piece and shoved it in my mouth. It was Canadian chocolate. And my book is called Chocolate, The Taste of Freedom. That was my first taste of freedom. So we were freed, and now, where are my parents? So a decision was made by the resistance, we should go back on the farm with Ann and wait to see if my parents survived. And all I remember is in the pump room, they had a door to the outside, there was a water pump, and a door to the inside. And we were on the inside door, standing there with Ann, hiding. She had these big, I was on her right. And there was a man and a woman standing in the doorway. I don't know who they were. And Ann gave me a little shove. And he said, "That is your mommy and your daddy. Shake their hand." So I went up, shook their hand, and ran back. I didn't know them. So they decided they better stay on the farm a little bit because we didn't recognize them. So they stayed on the farm a little bit, and I wanted to show my father. I was so excited because I had special toys. While we're on the farm, I collected all sorts of spent ammunition. It was all over the place. Planes had crashed, and I went through, sometimes through them and found things that a child could play with. I wasn't supervised very well. And I had secret shelves in the barn. I would go in there and play with this stuff. So I wanted to show my father, because then when we were gone for 4 months in the fishing village, when we came back, first thing I did was go to the farm. It was still there, nobody found it. So I wanted to show my father. Well, he told me later on, he said, "Oh, really?" He found out it was all live ammunition. I had a couple of hand grenades. And I had been playing with this stuff. I never saw it again. I have no idea what happened to it. But then I guess my parents, so finally, and my mother would never forgive me for that. She said, "You're 9.5 years old," and you said to my parents, I said, "Okay, we will go home with you, but if we don't like you, we're coming back and living with Aunt." So my mother said, "Okay." And we went back home with my parents. We had to hitchhike, of course, and everything, and our home was gone. We moved into my Dutch grandparents' home. They weren't there, and the house was, because what happened during the war, as people were into hiding or went on the trains, they came in, hired a local, like American Van Lines or one of those moving companies. They went into the houses, took everything out of the house, and shipped it to Germany. So the house was empty. There was nothing in the house. There we stood, the 4 of us, with just the clothes on our backs to start life. Oh, something happened. Is this on? Yes. Oh, see, somebody thought ahead. But it was just very, very difficult. But where was the rest of our family? And I remember my mother receiving a note from the Dutch Red Cross informing her that her parents, my German grandparents, who thought they'd also come to the Netherlands to be safe, were taken. My Dutch grandfather, my mother was an only child, my father's sister married, and I had 3 little cousins. They all perished in Sobibor in Poland. The only one who was buried in the United States is my Dutch grandmother, who had been in the hospital. She died in Amsterdam and is actually buried. Some dear friends of mine found her in the cemetery, a Jewish cemetery outside of Amsterdam, where she is buried. So it was very, very difficult. Now, my parents survived because that day that my sister and I went into hiding after my father had brought us away, that evening, friends of my parents, Christian friends, snuck into the house to see my parents, see how they were doing, if they needed anything. And they came in and they said, "Well, where are the girls?" So my parents explained that we went into hiding. And they said, "Well, where are you going to go?" And they said, "We have no place to go." So they said, "Well, come and stay with us." They lived at the edge of town. They had like a self-standing building. It was a car dealership with a showroom in the front, service area in the back, and they lived in the apartment above it. They said, "There's only one little problem. There's 2 German officers living in one of our bedrooms." Because my hometown was a military town, which was now all occupied by German soldiers. And most of the officers didn't want to stay there and just either come and threw people out of their homes and took the home, or here they were in the bedroom. But my parents thought they would take that risk. So they packed a few things and walked over there. My parents lived in their attic for 3 years. My dad could never go outside because this was our hometown. He'd be recognized and immediately taken because even the German soldiers were taking young men right off the street, shipped them to Germany to work in their factories. My mother used to go out dressed as a nurse, she told me, and try to get food for them and their 2 friends. But she was rather attractive, but she also, German was her native tongue, she listened to soldiers who were flirting with her and would give her, she said they'd give her a cigarette. She doesn't smoke, but my father did. She'd take a couple of puffs, put it in her pocket to bring back to give to my father. But she would overhear sometimes some things. And she said she knew where some of the resistant people lived and she would tell them what she had heard. But they survived because their friends, again, cared enough. And then we were reunited and we stayed with the parents. Though every summer my sister and I would spend our vacations with Aunt and the other family. And even to this day, I'm in the Netherlands every year because I take teachers to the Holocaust sites, and our last stop is the Netherlands. And we always get together, you know. They're all gone. All the, you know, who helped us, but all the family, the nieces, the nephews, and their children, all, it's like one big family, and I always tease them when I'm there. I say, well, I'm a sprunk also. And it's just been so wonderful, and I think what's so wonderful too is that people cared so much, and it's so important for me to share my story, because many years ago, not many people knew about the camps, but not much about people who were hidden. And the wonderful people who risked their lives to save us and take care of us, even though they didn't know who we were. And I'm so thankful for that, of people caring so much. And that's what I try to do, especially when I speak to students. I never talk, I've seen horrible things as a child. Things have happened to my sister and I during those 3 years. But the most important thing, and I don't talk about it, that's there, is the kindness of people. And that's what I try to instill into our students, of how we have to care, how people cared. That is so important. So I don't know how I'm doing time-wise. Yeah, I have some slides to show you some of the pictures. And I don't like talking to slides as I'm talking and pointing. I always like to do it afterwards, because even students will say, oh yeah, I remember that, what you said. Now they remember when you go show it and talk at the same time. So this way I can explain the slides of some of the things so you can see. All right? This was the star that I had to wear. This was my book, Chocolate, The Taste of Freedom. It's now been translated in Dutch just recently. Somebody in the fishing village where we were hiding, an organization there, decided they wanted to have it in Dutch. They did the whole thing, translated it, but of course I was the only one who could read it. Nobody could read Dutch. I approved it, and they didn't like the tiles. They decided they wanted a picture. And then after it was published, they gave it to every school child in the 2 communities where we were hidden. And it's been interesting, some of the remarks, because one of the parents, oh yeah, don't you remember that your opa or your grandfather lived across the street? They can all relate to things in the book, and that's been wonderful for them to do that. And on top is a PBS documentary that was filmed in 2004. And it was filmed in the Netherlands, and it's actually accessible. It's called The Hidden Child. You can find it on on the internet, because Rutgers University, can't buy it anymore, but Rutgers University put it in their library. So it's now available on the internet. You can watch it. It's about an hour. Okay. This was a family picture that was taken. Must have been taken about a year or so before the war. I'm the one next to my dad with the neat hairdo. That was the style, this, whatever. Okay. And this is a composite picture of the family. On the top left are my Dutch grandparents. The top right, my German grandparents. Below that is my father's sister, her husband, and my 3 little cousins. And as I said, they all perished in Soviet war, except my Dutch grandmother on the left. Okay. This was the way the train station looked in the 1940s, because it doesn't look like that at all anymore. And that little building on the right was where that was a kiosk that my grandfather had. Okay. This is a picture, I took that, you can tell by the date of the cars. That was the restaurant where my father worked for his father. It's all gone too now, but okay. This was a picture taken at that restaurant. It's myself and my cousin with my grandparents. Now, when we couldn't go to school anymore, as I said, some of the Jewish mothers and Jewish teachers got together and rented rooms in so many buildings, wherever they could find it, to continue our education. And this was one of those classrooms. You can do the next one, too. And my sister and I are both there. And the young man up there on the top right with the teacher in front, is her arm in front of him. We've reconnected through the years. He and his brother both survived also. And, but most of the other children all died and were murdered in the camps. Okay. My mother had to buy the stars. She had to pay 1 guilder for each star, cut it out, and sew it on our clothing. Okay. This was in Amsterdam. Many of the Jews from my hometown, and I know there were 360 Jews who perished from my hometown, they were all sent to Amsterdam first. Were at this theater, and then eventually went to the transit camps and then onto the concentration camps. And this says in German, Jewish quarter, and underneath in Dutch, Jewish quarter. It wasn't like a ghetto that it was closed, it was open. But people were just thrown into these houses and into apartments. Okay. The Nazis didn't like the names of our streets in Amsterdam, because they were Jewish related. It was a Jewish name, or there was some connection, so they took them all down and put up their own signs. Okay. And these are people that are getting off the trolley car, walking into this theater with their luggage. Okay. And then the first time I went, I didn't even know this, and I had lived in Amsterdam. I found they had in this theater a big thing with an eternal light and many names of people they knew who had been in that theater for a number of weeks before they were sent out. And I found my family name, P-E-P-E-R, and Eschwege, my German grandparents, so I knew my family had also been there for some time. Okay, that was a duplicate, sorry. This was the company that they hired to take all the stuff out of everybody's home, and it became a verb. When they said you were pulsed, you knew what happened to your furniture gone. Okay. This is a picture of the farmhouse. This was taken, it's changed again because all these things are now modernized and changing. But this was the farmhouse. And to the right, on the right-hand side on that picture is the farmhouse. And to the left, that green building was where Aunt's brother, where he made his wooden shoes. And behind that, you can see it's like a red roof sticking up a little bit. That was the barn where that young Jewish boy was hidden. So after they moved him immediately after that incident with me and the German soldiers, he was in the same village as we were, but I never saw him. But he did survive the war. Okay. I found this, I think it was in a book, and I realized when I looked at the picture, that's my sister and I. And you see the wooden shoes? And it must have been taken on a Sunday on the farm during the war because everybody is dressed so nice. Okay. And then Aunt was very brave. She decided to take us to a photographer. which she really took a chance doing that one. And she wanted a picture of us. And she dressed us back into the clothes we had arrived in. And that's why we're standing like this, because it barely fit. The shoes were standing like this. The shoes didn't fit anymore, because we now wore also wooden shoes. But she wanted us to look nice. This on the left is a picture of Uncle, and to the right is Aunt's brother. That was a hearing aid in the 1940s. You had to shout into this thing, and hopefully he could hear you. And it was so cute. I had a bunch of 5th graders, and when that picture came up with the hearing aids, little boy says, look, just look at my hearing aid. It's not like that at all. Because, you know, everything is so small now. Okay. And then I had both families of rescuers honored at Yad Vashem in Israel as righteous. And each family received, and this is the one for the family of the fishing village, of their names and their daughter, and they received a certificate as righteous and also a medal. And the same with the other family. The only person who was still alive was the daughter of the second family. She was able to accept it for her parents and herself. And it's so interesting because in a little fishing village, there was a little synagogue. And it has become a museum. And both families have now given these certificates to the museum. They wanted that to be there because they're afraid the kids, as time goes on, it's going to get lost. So people can see how they were honored by Yad Vashem. Okay. Then I must have been sometime after I was already in the United States, my mother gave me this letter. And I started reading it, and it says, Dear Mommy and Daddy, we like it here very much, but we like to be free, and we very much like to see you again when we come back. I'm helping Ann milk the cows. I want to become a farmer's girl. And then it said, the teacher is already giving us lessons, and I can already read a little bit. And I'm sleeping by one of the neighbors, and Rita by another neighbor, because Uncle had died. And it was the tradition there, the front room of this farmhouse was called a funeral door, wasn't the usual door. And they laid him out for 5 days. And there was also the room where we slept. We didn't have beds. They have something called stay in the Netherlands. It's like, looks like a little closet, but it's about, you open it up and it's about this high, and it was like a straw mattress that we slept on. So we couldn't sleep in that room. And then it says, Uncle has died. I'll write more later. And then it's signed, goodbye, so long, Margie and Rika Sprung. And I was trying to rack my brain. I remember one day someone gave me something, it was in pencil. I knew there were letters, I couldn't read it. And I knew there were letters, so they gave me a pot of ink and a pen and had me trace all the letters. And then when the ink was dry, they erased the pencil. And somehow, through the resistance, my parents got this note. So they knew, so this was I figured he died in January, probably got it maybe in March or April. They knew at that point that we were still alive. This was the house in the little fishing village. We were up on the 2nd floor. Okay. And from that window with the arrow to down there, that's what I could see where the tanks came in. You can see it's all cobblestone. That's where the Canadians came into the village. Okay. And then also there was large woods not too far away. And many people in those villages around there created these huts in the woods. They're all camouflaged with greenery to blend in. And many Jews were hidden there. Also many pilots, because there were lots of planes shot down, and some of the pilots survived, and people were able to rescue them. They also transited through this forest to get back to England. But one day, and the German soldiers loved going to this forest because it had wild boar, and they were hunting boar. And then one day they were in the forest, and they saw a little boy just playing around. They thought, this is really strange. They shot in the air, and all the soldiers who were hunting came, and they discovered all these huts. And many of the villagers saved, and it was just, I don't know if you saw on the bottom, there was, these 8 people were the 8 people that were murdered that day. But many of the people who were in there were saved, because villagers came right in and saved them. Okay. This was the building where my parents were hidden. It's already boarded up. It's long gone. That was the car dealership. And this was the side of it. And my parents were hidden in that attic. They didn't have the sliding glass doors at that time. And it was strange because the day I stopped there, I had a group of American teachers, Jersey teachers with me. And there were people, it was no longer a car dealership. People were renting the apartment, and a lady came out and was like, what are you all doing here? And I explained, and she said, oh, she said, you know, she said, the people who owned this building had a hard time renting this apartment because there were ghosts. So I said, what do you mean? She said, well, there were 4 ghosts, and then there was 1 ghost, and now there are no ghosts. And it really gave me the creeps because there were 4 people living there, my parents' friends and them. And the last of the 4 to pass away was my mother. And it was right after that she told me about the ghosts. But the building is gone, okay? These were the tanks, as you can see, in the fishing village. That was the chocolate. Okay. And this was, you've heard of the stumbling blocks or Stolpersteine that are placed all over Europe. I don't know, is it me? Great. And these were, I placed 6 of them in my hometown for my family. Many of them in many places, they're copper. But in my hometown, it was an artist who developed it, and they used the little black things. And I'm standing there, and these were for my Dutch grandparents. And it says, here lived Rebecca Paper de Jong, murdered, it said, well, in Amsterdam, but she died on the 12th of May, 1942. She was 63 years old, and it's my grandfather murdered in Sobibor, and the date he was murdered, and he was 60 years old. Okay. This was one of the transit camps, first in the Netherlands. Okay. This was the same camp. There were many children there, as you can see from that little piece there, the ages of these children who were hidden there, or there, and then were taken from Vught to Auschwitz and were murdered. Yes, go ahead. This was a big memorial in the woods there, also dedicated to many people. Yeah. This is a picture of my husband and I. At that time when that was taken, we were 20 years old, working for Pan American World Airways. Okay. But the next picture is the most wonderful picture to me. This is our family. We have 4 children, 9 grandchildren, and 2 great-grandchildren. And why I'm so proud of this is only possible because people cared enough to risk their lives to save us. And I'm so fortunate to be alive and to have these wonderful children in our lives, and only because of people cared so much. And it always makes me cry just to see that picture, knowing it would never have happened if people hadn't stepped in and helped us and saved us. This is the end of my presentation. Yes. Thank you. Okay. I don't know if anybody has some questions. We have We're more than welcome to take any questions you might have.
Thank you for sharing with us. I have hundreds of questions, but I'm just going to ask one. You were in the Netherlands when the war ended in 1945 and then came to the United States in 1950. Tell us about that intermission in your life and about the decision to come to the United States.
Well, after the war, it was very difficult. I had a nervous breakdown a couple of months after I came home, I guess. It was just too much, and it was very difficult after those years, right after the war, in many, many ways. And then some of my mother's relatives had left Germany, and some had settled in the United States. They found we had survived and asked us, they would sponsor us to come to America. And first my father said no, because he had just started to get a job, and we were trying to rebuild our lives. And then he decided, no, there's too many memories here. No matter where you went, there was a memorial for something. And he said, no, I want my children to go to the United States. So he accepted, and we arrived in the United States in 1950. But then we had to start life all over again. And when you immigrate, and of course they did all the paperwork and everything, I was separated from the group because it's 5 years, and I was going to be 18 in those years, so I ended up became an American by myself. But I remember my father had to have a job, and we lived in a rooming house in Manhattan. It's disgusting, but but he got his first job was as a busboy at the Astor Hotel in Times Square, and then he moved up to room clerk. So we started life all over again, one thing after another, and eventually made our lives here. And my sister and I went to school here, but we had a little problem. I was 14 and a half years old, and when I started school, we moved to Queens. I was put in the 4th grade because I couldn't speak English, and nobody could test me. And so the first summer, my sister and I spent in a movie theater, because it was 25 cents. Well, it's all relative anyway, as to what it costs today and what it was then. But you could stay all day, and they would show a cartoon, a newsreel, the film would start again, and you could just stay and sit. So we sat there all day, and it was air conditioned. And that's when I came back to school. I was in the 5th grade, and they were able to test me. And they said, she should be in high school, because in the Netherlands we don't have a 7th and 8th grade. So I went right into high school and ended up graduating with kids my own age, even though I didn't start school till I was 9. But it was a hard adjustment. I didn't like it here till I started working for Pan Am, and I had an opportunity, because you could fly for 20%, to go back to the Netherlands, and I realized what an American I had become after 5 years here.
I do have a question. You mentioned thinking ahead regarding the microphones. And one of the things that stood out to me in your story is that when the letter was read at the temple, that they were sending trains to the east and you guys would be going here, your parents instinctively knew. So my question to you is, did your mother ever discuss how did they, I'm interested in instinct, how did they know, now we don't need to get on those trains? So could you talk to that a little bit?
About how did my mother,
How did they know
what was happening, that we were going to be put on trains somewhere?
Yes, like how did they know we need to hide versus stay here? Because everybody didn't make the same decision, and you, your parents had the foresight to make that decision there.
Well, because, you know, the resistance knew a lot, and they informed people that what was happening, because they found out eventually where those trains were going. They weren't too sure, but they knew. So many people, that's when people came forward and decided they should hide, because they had our name and everything. They'd find us and take us away. So they decided to take action right away. My aunt also had an address for her children, my cousins. But now we can wait a little longer, you know, it's not that bad, till they were all taken. So it was kind of a good decision my parents made right away. When they realized something was going on, this was an opportunity and they took it.
Thank you so much for being here. I'm an older sister myself. What is your relationship like with your sister? Have y'all discussed what y'all went through together? Has she had her own memories as she's become an adult of what this was like for her and how y'all worked through that with each other?
Well, it was hard. As I said, I had a nervous breakdown. But she, you know, she was so little and I protected her. I was her mother. And so she never really understood anything of what was going on around her. I watched over her. I remember one day when we were in a fishing village, the family wanted us to go to a farm to see if we could get a couple of eggs. And we had to go walk on this dike. It was that lake again. And on the other side were meadows. And I remember the two of us walking there, and there was an attack started. They were bombing and fighting in the village that we were headed to. And here we are in nowhere, the two of us on top of this dike. So I grabbed her to lie by the side of this dike so we wouldn't be shot, because a lot of the German planes with their little fighter, they would get great fun of picking people off their bicycles, just shooting them off the bicycles, you know, swoop down and shoot. So I knew that. And I remember as we're lying there, she suddenly saw a beautiful, a cornflower, whatever it's called, a flower, and she got up to get that flower and just grabbed her and put it down. Another time she went over to some German soldiers, they had all these big guns, and she went over there and she said, "Hi, can I shoot?" And she had no idea, you know, but I knew, so I had to watch over her, and we've always been very, very close. But she never understood, and I protected her and I was her mother. She did what I told her, and now we're with my own mother, and when my mother wanted her to do something, it came through me. And, you know, she got a little older and told me to leave her alone. You're not my mother, you know, and she was on her own, but unfortunately, she's suffering from dementia now. But, and I was just with her in South Carolina, and she's in an assisted living situation. And she said, "I want everybody here to know our story. Would you tell everybody our story?"
I remember when you were saying that your parents said that you guys were going away for vacation. When you got there, how long did it take you to realize like what was really going on and that you weren't really going to see your parents in a few weeks?
I really don't know, because sometimes somebody has a lot of questions, but I don't know what I was thinking. I was only 6.5 years old, and I really don't know, you know, what I was thinking at that time. I have no idea, because I didn't fully understand everything. So I do not know what my thoughts were, but I knew I had parents, but other than that, no, because there was no contact, no talking to them or anything, and maybe I just felt they gave up on us. I don't know.
Okay. Well, Maud actually has to be up very early tomorrow morning because she's going to be going to Booker T. Washington School. We had the honor of taking her.
I do have one thing I'd like to read, if that's okay. But you all have me very busy.
We do. She was at the Alabama School of Fine Arts today. She'll be at Booker T. Washington in the morning, and then she is going to be at Liberty Park Middle in the afternoon. So we're definitely keeping her busy.
I do want to share one really quick thing. I was invited back to the Netherlands in April, this past April, to be there for the 80 years of the village that was freed that day, of April the 19th, 1945, to stand there April the 19th this year. And unbeknownst to me, I was knighted by the King of the Netherlands. I had no idea. And it was done because of all the work that I've been doing in Holocaust education and talking too about my story of the Netherlands. But may I just read one thing?
Of course, yes.
It's called Righteous of the World. I hear this title and it makes me think about the people who saved me. I ask and ask, oh my dear God, could I have done the same thing? In the sea of hate stood my home. Could I shelter a foreign son in my home? Would I be willing, along with my family, constantly be threatened by certain evil? Sleepless dark nights, watching out for noise, hearing footsteps of certain evil. Would I be able to understand every sign? Would I be ready to do this? Could I walk like this among those who would betray? Not one day, not 1 week, but so many years. There's a suspicious neighbor. There a look, and here a sound. For that one warm brotherly clasping of my hand. Not having any pension, not having anything for this, because a person to person must be a people. Because a people comes at this time through. So I ask you, and I ask you once more, could I have done the same thing if I was in their place? It was they who went to war every day. It was they who made the world a place for me. It was they, the pillars, the righteous brother, who this day, this world is founded by. For your courage and for your warm extended hand, in front of you, the righteous, I bow. Thank you.
Thank you all again for being here tonight. It is my hope that, as I said in the beginning, that you did hear something that you can share with somebody at some point soon. I do want to make one small announcement, and if I can ask, on January 27th, we are going to be lighting Birmingham up in the color yellow. Maud wore the color yellow, the star. We're reclaiming that as a symbol of remembrance, resilience, courage. Look around the city of Birmingham, Hoover, Irondale, Vestavia, Mountain Brook, and Homewood will all be lighting up their city halls. The Vulcan Tower is going to be lit up in yellow, so please join us in lighting up yellow.